My ex cheated with her manager after I paid her college fees and supported her dreams, so I walked away emotionless and she came crying. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and for most of my early 20s, my entire sense of worth came from being dependable. Not flashy. Not exciting. Just reliable. The kind of man who shows up, pays the bills, and keeps his promises even when no one's watching. I thought that was what love was supposed to look like. I met my ex when she was drowning in everything at once: money problems, anxiety, failing classes, and this constant fear that she was falling behind in life. She cried on our second date, sitting across from me in a dim cafe, twisting the sleeve of her sweater and whispering, "I just need someone who won't give up on me." I remember reaching across the table without thinking and saying, "I won't." I meant it with everything I had. Slowly, without a single dramatic conversation, I became her safety net. I picked up extra shifts. I stopped going out with friends. I told myself vacations could wait. When tuition deadlines came up, I paid them. When her books cost more than expected, I covered that too. Rent, groceries, gas, every gap in her life quietly became my responsibility. She'd hug me and say, "This is just temporary. One day, we'll laugh about how hard this was." She talked endlessly about her dream career, about how she wanted to be successful with me, not without me. "I won't forget this," she'd say, resting her head on my chest. "You're investing in us." Hearing that made the exhaustion feel noble, like I was building something solid brick by brick. I ignored how tired I always was. I ignored how my own goals stayed stuck in the background. I told myself that real men sacrifice, that this was what loyalty looked like. And every time doubt crept in, I buried it under the belief that love meant giving more. What I didn't see, what I refused to see, was how uneven everything had become. How easy it was for her to take, and how natural it felt for me to give. And somewhere beneath all that talk about the future, there were small cracks forming in the foundation I was trusting my life to. At the time, I thought we were building something unbreakable. I didn't know I was already standing on fault lines. Somewhere along the way, our relationship stopped feeling like two people building something together and started feeling like a system where I carried the weight and she managed the hope. It wasn't sudden. It happened quietly, disguised as responsibility. One semester turned into another, one bill into 10, and before I realized it, my role wasn't boyfriend anymore, it was provider. I paid her tuition directly because she said it stressed her out to even look at the numbers. "You're better with money," she'd tell me, sliding her laptop toward me at the kitchen table. I remember the glow of the screen reflecting off unpaid balances while she scrolled through her phone, trusting me to handle it. When I hesitated, she'd smile and say, "I'll make it up to you when I graduate. This is just for now." I covered late fees without telling her. I dipped into my savings when her part-time job cut her hours. I told myself it was fine because she was trying. Because she always said thank you. Because she kissed my cheek and whispered, "I couldn't do this without you." Those words kept me going when my bank account dropped lower than I was comfortable admitting. At night, I'd lie awake listening to her breathe beside me, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly, doing mental math instead of dreaming. Trips with friends disappeared from my calendar. Promotions I could have chased felt risky, so I stayed where the paycheck was steady. I kept telling myself this was temporary, that love required patience and endurance. But something subtle started shifting. When money came up, her gratitude felt rehearsed, almost automatic. If I looked tired or stressed, she'd say, "Don't make this about money," like I was being unfair for even feeling it. When I asked about her future plans, she'd talk big, but never about how we'd balance things once she was stable. I began to notice how easily she accepted everything I gave, like it was expected. How my sacrifices became invisible the moment they were convenient. Still, I pushed the discomfort down, afraid that questioning it would make me the bad guy. Because if this was what supporting someone you loved looked like, why did I feel so alone doing it? The job was supposed to be a good thing. That's what I told myself when she came home one evening, eyes bright, talking faster than usual. She dropped her bag by the door and said, "I finally got something related to my field. It's part-time for now, but it could turn into an internship." I remember smiling, genuinely relieved, like maybe the pressure I'd been carrying was finally about to ease. She talked a lot about her manager from the start. His name came up casually at first, how he really believed in her, how he gave her advice no one else had. He says I have potential, she told me once while scrolling through her phone. He actually listens. I nodded, even though something about that sentence stuck with me longer than it should have. Her schedule started changing. Late shifts became normal. Group projects turned into work dinners. She'd come home smelling like someone else's cologne mixed with the cold night air, tossing her keys onto the counter like she was exhausted. When I asked how work went, she'd answer vaguely, already halfway into the bedroom. It was fine. Long day, she'd say, locking her phone the moment I sat down beside her. I noticed the little things before the big ones. How she angled her screen away from me. How she laughed at texts but never said who they were from. When I asked, gently, she sighed and said, "You're overthinking again." The word again stung. It made me feel like this was a flaw I'd always had, not a reaction to new behavior. I told myself I didn't want to be that guy, the insecure boyfriend threatened by a woman's success. I reminded myself how much I'd invested in her future, how trust was part of that investment. So I swallowed the discomfort and congratulated her when she talked about her manager's praise. Still, late at night, lying beside her while she typed quietly on her phone, I felt something shift. Like there was a door slowly closing between us, one message at a time. I didn't know who she was becoming close to. I only knew it wasn't me anymore. Once her job became a regular part of her life, everything else started rearranging itself around it, especially me. Conversations that used to feel easy became tense, like I was always one wrong sentence away from an argument. Anytime I brought up how distant she seemed, she'd lean back and say, "You're just not used to me being busy." As if wanting basic connection was something I needed to grow out of. She started talking about personal growth a lot. About how she was evolving, learning confidence, finding her voice. And somehow, in those conversations, I was always positioned as the thing holding her back. "You're comfortable where you are," she said once, folding laundry aggressively. "Some of us actually want more." The words hit harder than she probably intended, or maybe exactly as hard as she wanted. I tried explaining how exhausted I was, how carrying everything alone was wearing me down. She crossed her arms and replied, "I never asked you to do all that." That sentence stayed with me. Years of sacrifices reframed as my choice, my problem. When I reminded her about tuition, rent, all of it, she snapped, "Why do you always throw money in my face?" I wasn't throwing it, I was drowning in it. The more she leaned into her new life, the more critical she became of mine. My job wasn't ambitious enough. My schedule was boring. Even my concerns started sounding like insecurity to her. "My manager says real support means trust," she told me once, casually, like she was quoting something wise. I remember wondering why his opinion mattered more than mine. I started apologizing for things I didn't understand. For my tone. For my timing. For asking questions that made her uncomfortable. She had a way of flipping every conversation until I was the one trying to fix things. I'd walk away confused, heart pounding, wondering how I'd become the problem in a relationship I was funding. Deep down, I felt it, that sense that I was being slowly pushed out while still being expected to pay my way in. But every time I tried to grab onto that feeling, she smoothed it over with words like growth and independence. And I wanted so badly to believe her, that I ignored how small I was starting to feel. The first real crack didn't come from a message or a confession. It came from something smaller, almost harmless, which somehow made it worse. I was at the kitchen table one afternoon paying bills, the familiar tightness in my chest settling in as I moved money between accounts, when her phone buzzed on the counter. She was in the shower. Steam fogged the bathroom mirror, water pounding steadily, and the phone kept lighting up again and again. I wasn't trying to snoop. I swear that's the truth. But the screen lit up just enough for me to see a name I recognized, her manager's. And beneath it, a message preview that said, "Last night felt different." That was it. No emojis. No explanation. Just those 3 words that instantly made my stomach drop. When she came out, wrapped in a towel, humming softly like nothing in the world was wrong, I asked casually, "Hey, did you work late again yesterday?" She froze for half a second. Barely noticeable. Then she said, "Yeah. Same as usual." Her eyes didn't meet mine. Something in me tightened. I asked a few more questions, gentle ones, the kind meant to give someone space to tell the truth. The answers didn't line up. Times shifted. Details blurred. When I mentioned the message I'd seen, her entire tone changed. "Why were you looking at my phone?" she snapped, anger flaring instantly. Not confusion. Not reassurance. Anger. She accused me of spying, of invading her privacy, of trying to control her. The conversation escalated so fast I barely recognized it. I found myself apologizing again, backing down, even though my heart was racing and my instincts were screaming. She said, "If you don't trust me, that's your issue." And just like that, the focus wasn't on the message anymore, it was on my supposed flaws. Later that night, she went to bed early, turning her back to me. I sat alone in the living room, lights off, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and replaying everything in my head. The message. Her reaction. The way the truth felt just out of reach. For the first time, I didn't feel confused. I felt afraid, because part of me already knew the answer I wasn't ready to face. I didn't go looking for proof at first. I told myself that if I dug any deeper, I'd only find something I couldn't come back from. But once doubt takes root, it doesn't stay quiet. It grows in the silence, in the gaps between explanations, in the way someone suddenly guards their life like you're an intruder instead of a partner. A few days later, she left her laptop open on the couch while she ran to the store. The screen was glowing, notifications stacked in the corner. I tried to ignore it. I really did. But then I saw his name again. And this time, there was no ambiguity. No vague wording. Just intimacy laid out in plain text, like it had been waiting for me. Messages about late nights that weren't about work. About how hard it was pretending around me. About how she felt seen in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. My chest went cold. My hands started shaking so badly I had to sit down. Every line felt like a quiet admission that this hadn't been a mistake, it had been a choice. Repeated. Comfortable. When she came back, I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just asked, "How long?" Her face drained of color instantly. She sat down slowly, like her body already knew there was no escaping this. "It's not what you think," she said, automatically. Then, after a long pause, it just happened. But it hadn't just happened. It had grown. While I was paying tuition, she was building a connection with someone else. While I was skipping meals to stretch our budget, she was sharing pieces of herself I thought were mine. And the worst part, the part that still makes my stomach turn, was realizing that my support had made it easier. I'd funded the freedom. I'd removed the stress. I'd given her the space to replace me. She cried, but there was something rehearsed about it. She talked about confusion, about feeling lost, about how she never meant to hurt me. Not once did she say she was sorry for using what I gave her to walk away emotionally. That night, I slept on the couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling something crack open inside me. I knew the truth now, but I hadn't yet decided what it was going to cost me. After the truth came out, I thought the worst part would be the cheating itself. I was wrong. The real damage came from what she did after, the way she slowly rewrote our entire relationship like it was a flawed draft she'd finally outgrown. Suddenly, everything we'd been through together had a new explanation, and none of it was kind to me. She told me she felt emotionally neglected. That I was always tired, always stressed, always thinking about money. "You stopped being present," she said one night, sitting across from me at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd paid her tuition just months earlier. I stared at her, waiting for some acknowledgement of what I'd carried for us, but it never came. Instead, she added, I needed someone who inspired me. I reminded her of the late nights I worked. The weekends I gave up. The way I built my entire routine around keeping her afloat. She sighed and said, "I didn't ask you to be a martyr." That word martyr hit me harder than any insult before it. It turns sacrifice into ego, loyalty into weakness. She framed the cheating as a symptom, not a betrayal. As if her actions were an inevitable response to my shortcomings. He just understood me, she said quietly. He saw who I was becoming. I wanted to ask why I wasn't allowed to grow too. Why I was frozen in time as the provider while she evolved into someone who didn't need me anymore. Every conversation ended the same way, with her crying and me feeling guilty. Guilty for not being enough. Guilty for being hurt. Guilty for still wanting honesty from someone who'd already decided I was the past. I found myself apologizing again, even though I didn't know what for. At night, I'd lie awake next to her, listening to her breathe, feeling like a stranger in a life I'd financed. I wasn't angry yet. I was hollow. Watching the person I loved turn me into the villain of her story so she wouldn't have to face what she'd done. And the scariest part was this: a piece of me was starting to believe her. I wish I could say I left the moment the truth came out. That I packed a bag, held onto my dignity, and walked away clean. But that's not what happened. I stayed. And admitting that still makes my chest tighten with shame. I stayed because I was tired. Because after years of carrying everything, I didn't have the energy to imagine starting over. I stayed because part of me thought that if I just held on a little longer, the version of her I fell in love with might come back. She cried when she thought she was losing me, and those tears still worked on me. They always had. We lived in this strange limbo. Technically together, emotionally fractured. She'd act distant for days, then suddenly soft, crawling into bed beside me and whispering, "I don't want to lose you." I'd cling to those moments like proof that I still mattered. Meanwhile, she kept her phone on silent, face down, like a loaded weapon we both pretended wasn't there. I kept paying for things. Rent. Utilities. Groceries. Even when my stomach twisted every time I transferred money. Every payment felt like a quiet betrayal of myself, but stopping felt like giving up on everything I'd already sacrificed. I hated myself for that logic, but it controlled me. The worst moments were the casual ones. Sitting across from her while she scrolled through her phone, smiling at something she wouldn't share. Hearing her talk about work like nothing had changed. Watching how easily she slipped back into comfort while I lived in constant anxiety. I felt invisible in my own home, useful, but replaceable. One night, after she went to sleep without saying goodnight, I sat alone on the bathroom floor with the light off. My back against the tub. My head in my hands. I remember thinking, is this really who I've become? A man who knows he's being disrespected and still stays quiet. That was my lowest point. Not the cheating. But the moment I realized I was choosing pain just to avoid emptiness. And something in me didn't break that night, it went numb instead. The numbness didn't arrive loudly. It didn't come with rage or tears or dramatic ultimatums. It settled in quietly, like a fog rolling over everything I used to feel. One morning, I woke up and realized I didn't care where she was. That terrified me more than any argument we'd ever had. I stopped asking questions. Stopped checking the time when she came home late. When she talked about work, I nodded without really listening. My chest no longer tightened at the sound of her phone buzzing. It was like a switch had flipped, and all the emotion I'd been hoarding finally shut down to protect me. She noticed almost immediately. "You're being weird," she said one night, studying my face like she was searching for something. I shrugged and said, "I'm just tired." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I was tired of bleeding quietly while she moved on in front of me. I stopped trying to fix things. I stopped defending myself. When she provoked arguments, I didn't bite. When she accused me of pulling away, I didn't deny it. The power dynamic shifted in subtle ways. She started asking where I was going. Started texting me first. Started needing reassurance I no longer offered. Inside, something cold and clear was forming. I began doing math again, not about how to stretch money, but about how to leave. I opened a new account she didn't know about. I paid down what I could. I imagined a life where my effort actually benefited me. The strangest part was how calm I felt. No adrenaline. No heartbreak. Just clarity. She could sense it, like an animal sensing a storm before it hits. One night, she reached for my hand in bed, and for the first time, I didn't squeeze back. She whispered, "Are you still in this with me?" I stared at the ceiling, the room heavy with unspoken truth. Because the answer had already changed, even if I hadn't said it out loud yet. I didn't plan some dramatic exit. There was no screaming match, no slammed doors, no final speech rehearsed in the mirror. The decision had already been made quietly, piece by piece, long before my body caught up to it. By the time I actually left, I felt eerily calm, like the storm had already passed through me and taken everything it needed. It happened on an ordinary morning. Gray light through the curtains. The hum of traffic outside. She was still asleep, curled toward the edge of the bed, phone charging inches from her hand. I stood there for a moment, watching her breathe, trying to feel something: sadness, anger, regret. All I felt was distance. I made coffee and sat alone at the table, the same one where I'd paid bills and swallowed resentment for years. When she finally came out, rubbing her eyes, she smiled faintly and said, "You're up early." I nodded and said, "We need to talk." My voice didn't shake. That surprised both of us. I told her I was done. Not in a cruel way. Not accusing. Just facts. "I can't do this anymore," I said. "I'm leaving." She laughed at first, like I was exaggerating. Then she saw my face. The color drained from hers. "You're serious," she whispered. She asked why now. Why so suddenly? I didn't explain everything, I didn't owe her that anymore. I told her I'd already transferred my share of the rent for the month, but after today, I was done financially. The panic hit her immediately. "Wait, what do you mean done?" she asked, voice cracking. That was the moment she finally understood what she'd lose. She cried. She reached for me. I stepped back. Not out of anger, but instinct. I packed what I needed, slowly, deliberately. No rush. No chaos. When I closed the door behind me, there was no relief yet, just a strange stillness. I sat in my car for a long time, hands on the wheel, heart steady. I didn't know what came next. But for the first time in years, I knew what I was leaving behind. The silence after I left was louder than anything we'd ever argued about. At first, there was nothing, no messages, no calls. I told myself she was fine, that she'd already moved on to the life she chose. I focused on getting through each day, adjusting to the unfamiliar feeling of not being responsible for someone else's survival. Then the texts started. Small at first. "Hey, can we talk?" I didn't respond. A day later, "I just want closure." Still nothing. I wasn't trying to punish her. I just didn't have anything left to say. Every word I'd ever needed her to hear had already been ignored. A week later, she showed up at my door. I opened it to find her standing there with red eyes and shaking hands, like someone who'd finally run out of options. She looked smaller somehow. Deflated. "Please," she said before I could speak. "I messed up." Her voice cracked, and suddenly she was crying the way she never did when it mattered. She told me things fell apart after I left. That her manager wasn't what she thought. That once she had to handle rent, bills, and school on her own, everything became overwhelming. "I didn't realize how much you did," she sobbed. "I thought I was strong enough without you." I listened. That surprised her. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just stood there while she unloaded guilt and regret like it might change something. She reached for my arm and said, "You were my stability. I need you. Not I love you. Not I'm sorry. Just need." That's when it clicked. She didn't miss me. She missed the version of life I made possible. The safety. The softness. The absence of consequences. And standing there, watching her beg, I felt something I didn't expect. Nothing. No anger. No satisfaction. Just clarity. I gently removed her hand from my arm and said, "I hope you figure things out." Her face crumpled as she realized I wasn't coming back. As I closed the door, my hands were steady. But my heart was already somewhere else, and she could feel it slipping beyond her reach. After I closed the door, I leaned my forehead against it and waited for the breakdown I thought was supposed to come. The sobbing. The regret. The second guessing. But it didn't happen. What came instead was quiet, so quiet it almost scared me. Like my nervous system had finally stopped bracing for impact after years of living on edge. The days that followed were strange in their simplicity. I woke up without dread. I checked my bank account without anxiety. I made decisions without mentally calculating how they would affect someone else. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd given away until there was suddenly room for me again. She tried reaching out a few more times. Longer messages this time. Apologies that sounded more polished. Promises about therapy, change, understanding. I read them once, calmly, and didn't reply. Not out of cruelty, but because engaging would have meant reopening a door I'd already sealed shut. Closure, I learned, isn't something someone else gives you. It's something you take when you stop explaining your pain to people who benefited from it. I started doing small things just for myself. Cooking real meals. Going to the gym. Calling friends I'd drifted away from. One night, while sitting alone on my couch, I realized I felt proud. Not because I won. Not because she suffered. But because I didn't betray myself anymore. The strangest part was realizing I didn't want revenge. I didn't need her to regret it forever. Life was already teaching her lessons I couldn't have delivered. My power came from walking away without bitterness, without begging, without turning my pain into noise. I finally understood something that took me years to learn: love without boundaries isn't love, it's self-erasure. And staying silent, choosing peace, rebuilding quietly, that was my justice. Sometimes healing doesn't look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a man who finally chooses himself and never looks back.